Hey everyone, thanks for coming along to another Quality Advocates event. Really pleased to have Abhijeet giving a talk all around the test pyramid and how he uses it in his day-to-day role, and hopefully sharing some top tips for you all. We do have a couple more lined up, so it would be great if you could pay attention to the meetup page, of course. But Abhijeet, if you're ready, it would be great if you could share your screen and get us underway.
Absolutely. Just hold on, let me turn on my camera. Can you see me?
Yeah, all good.
All right, let me start sharing my screen. All right, can you see my screen?
Yeah, I can see that. All good.
Cool. So, hello everyone, this is Abhijeet. Welcome to the talk. Today we are going to talk about practical test pyramid. Hope everyone can hear me right and okay. I'll take that as yes. Okay, so just to give about myself, I've been working as a QA since last 12 years. Have been fortunate enough to work on various technologies. Have been mostly technology agnostic. So, like I started my career with .NET, then I moved to Java, got an opportunity to work on Scala project as well, and recent experience was with all JavaScript tech stack. So with respect to various type of testing, I've been doing exploratory performance automation, securities aspect, which I'm still learning. So hoping that I'll get to learn more of it. And yeah, pretty much it. So to talk about the place where I work, Slalom is it's a modern consulting firm which focuses on strategies, uh, building technologies, doing business transformation, doing cloud migrations. And we are a couple of enthusiastic people who work, who are a couple of engineers. There are a couple of designers, and then we have strategies as well, like who go ahead and solve the problem of clients. So that's pretty much about place where I work. And we'll quickly move on to our, so if you guys have any laptops or to your mobiles, uh, like I'd like to collect some poll about like what do you mean by test pyramid. So if you can go to Slido.com and enter event code as 84252 and then answer what does it mean for you as a, what do you mean by test pyramid, or if you have any idea about test pyramid, I'd love to hear them. So please go to slido.com and enter the event 84252. Let me know if anyone is facing issues. I have seen anyone answer yet. Or from your phone, you can scan the QR code. Billy, am I audible? Okay, we have first answer over here. So stages of testing, I think that's close enough. We have 3 answers. Discussion, collaboration with Dave. I think various stages of testing is really close enough. But any more thoughts? What test pyramid means for you? Testing life cycle, yeah, it's close to that, but still not right there. We'll spend maybe another testing level. Yeah, various levels of test. What are the different tests you can write? I think that is something test pyramid hence. Where to put most efforts? Yeah, that's a good answer. I think it helps us to uh, give a guideline where we can focus our efforts and at what level. Different layers of software. Yep, that is also close enough. Where we talk about what are the layers of software where we can write those tests. Cool. I think that's really a good, I think, response. Let's get back to the slide. So usually the test pyramid is a metaphor which we use just to hint for us how we should have our test structured, or what test, or how we should balance our test. And like the test pyramid mostly hence us saying we should have more of unit test, and then maybe number of service tests and very few UI tests. So what we mean by service tests, it might be integration test, or it can be if you have microservices, then you can have maybe pack test, or so those are the tests which will come at service level, and UI tests are your UI interaction tests. So as we go towards top of pyramid, the execution speed is slower. So if you imagine, if you want to run a unit test, maybe if you want to run hundreds of unit tests, they can literally run in few seconds. But if you have to run same amount of UI tests, trying to maybe test the same thing, it might take maybe hours. So I think test pyramid can be taken as a metaphor. It's not really a completely a pyramid, but it's kind of hint where you say you should have really more focus than fewer service tests and UI tests. So, but then as we already know about this, but then why do we need it? Why do we need a test pyramid? I think the first thing is it takes less time to execute tests. So if you have really good, good balanced test pyramid, your execution of tests is pretty fast. So imagine, like in one of the project I had seen, my end-to-end test or my UI test used to take maybe hours and hours to run together to just give a feedback. Whereas in one of the projects where we had really good testing strategy and we had a right balance of tests, it used to take maybe 6 minutes to run all the tests for the complete application. So if you have less time to execute, that means you faster feedback. So any test failure or anything you need to know than earlier. So if you have a faster feedback, that means you fail faster, right? So if any regression introduced, your test can catch it, and you get to know in merely in minutes, you get to know if you have broken something, right? And what does that mean? So if we have faster failure, that means we can add more features quickly, or we can have more fixes quickly. If the feedback is slower, that means the time to figure out the regression or the issue would take more time. And that means we have frequent releases. And that for us is truly agile, right? So that's the main value we out of test pyramid. So when do we say we have unbalanced tests? So for me, I think if you try to take responsibility away. Say, for example, unit test has got their own significance. Service test has got their own significance, and end-to-end test has got their own significance. But if you try to mix the responsibility between them, that's what can lead us to unbalanced test pyramids. So, for example, if something is if a unit test is responsible maybe to do some tests, right, which are at unit level, and you're giving the same responsibility to maybe the end-to-end test. In that case, we might say we actually breaking the balance. So, uh, like, what is the main disadvantage of having unbalanced tests? So even if in modern days, even if you have really good DevOps pipelines, or you might have really good optimized code, or you might have best code you have, but then if you don't have right feedback, if you don't have right test, it will slow you down, right? So imagine if to verify a single issue, if your build is if your tests are running maybe hours, it's not worth it. So if you're not getting value out of it, maybe uh, people will start ignoring it, or people will start less valuing it. So we have to make sure if we balance it, then we will actually have better utilization of our modern DevOps pipeline. So the obvious question is, how do we address it, right? uh, what is the key, where we can start, or which is the right place to start? For me, I find it very easy to like application architecture, and I find application architecture is a good starting point to to find the gaps in our unbalanced test pyramid. So maybe we can take a look at a sample application, or for example, most of us, if we are using any web application, this is a standard architecture, right? You have a front end which talks to your backend or API services, and indeed the API services will talk to database, right? So in this case, what we usually have. So for example, if we have a front end application, right? The bids for auction. Just consider like this is an application where you're trying to where you're trying to submit bids. So in this case, if you maybe if this is right, what happens exactly in background is once you result, it might send a post request to an endpoint which can be bid. Once the backend gets the call, gets the request, right? What it will do is it will process it, and once it processes, it will send back the result to your application, right? So this is a typical architecture, and I find it quite easy to relate to this. So if we have to relate what are the different tests we want to identify, then what can be the first thumb rule? So for me, the first thumb rule is, uh, don't delegate the responsibility to someone else. Make sure you test everything there and there itself. So if you have a module, if you have a service, if you have a component, right? You make sure you have everything tested there and there itself. Say, for example, if you have a service which is maybe talking to a database, right? We would ideally have all the responsibility of maybe connecting to the database, or if you're writing any queries, and if you're trying to fetch some user details, we'll write a test there and there itself, rather than maybe delegating it to upper layer, right? So let's again come back to this example and see what are the different components. Or the components can be very contextual. We'll come to that, or what I mean by that. So for example, let's identify the boundaries, right? For the front end, we have different things. We have HTML, DOM, we have JavaScript, we have CSS. So front end will usually have your DOM, which will display maybe all the buttons or the labels or the text. Your JavaScript might be interaction between your DOM and your backend. So something like maybe capturing the input from the text box and sending a post request to your backend. and CSS is more like giving it more styling, right? So these are the three components of front end. What do we have at back end? Can have controllers, something like you might say, okay, I have a service called as maybe get me usernames, right? Get usernames can be a controller which you say /get, which maps to maybe a method which can be invoked by the framework, and then that that method can then talk to its maybe various components. Maybe it can be a service, maybe it can be a business logic. In our case, say if we in the bid auction, right? Uh, if I'm trying to bid, right, maybe it might invoke some logic which might say, okay, parse the input, or maybe after the input is passed, maybe process it, right? So there can be more business logic which can be different services or domain objects, and indeed there can be various libraries which can be used. So just to passing, I might build a library. So likewise, we can have different components. So that's why we said components is contextual. Then it might talk to a database. So you might have stored procedures, you might have repositories, which will talk to your database. Is that it? No, but I think there's more to it. With the modern application, we have infrastructure as code, something like Terraform, where you want to maybe you know you want to provision your infrastructure. You want to maybe create a Lambda function, or you want to talk to AWS service or Google service, GCP service. So you might use infrastructure as code as as a way to provision your services in more DevOps and more automated way. You might also have something like Kubernetes, which can do your infrastructure orchestration. If you want to create services at runtime, or if you want to maybe have multi-node architecture. So Kubernetes is infrastructure orchestration tool. So in that case, we might look for maybe uh, how we can see what are the is there anything we can do with it, or if there are third-party services, what are the different tests we have to write. And then if for your logs, maybe for your logs, you might also have to think of maybe some test, right? Some unit test, right? And then there are other aspects like for security or your static code analyzers, or maybe your pre-commits, which might just check if you're checking in a secret, right? So all this comes under various tests, or they do provide us value to catch our mistakes earlier, right? So, like as I already said, the components or modules are contextual, right? So what I can do is maybe at high level, I can let's look at one example I have. Let's jump code, right? So what I'll do is, so I have a sample application right now. So I have it up and running. Let me see. Yeah, it's up and running. As mentioned, I have a sample application which is an auction house, like we said initially. Say, let's not get into domain of this. Say, for example, these are various auctions, like be at 10 a.m. There's one auction which says I want to sell a toaster, and there are bids which starts coming in. And then again, there's another auction which says I want to sell a TV at 50, and then you have again some bids going on for both the cells. So this is the way we have an input. Say if we click on it, it sends it back, and you get to know who has won it, who has won the bid, right? So this is a sample application, and in this case, if you want to look at what are the various tests we have, then that's what we try to see. So if you look at our archetype, right? So it's exactly like we have a front end, then we have a back end, and ideally here we don't talk to any database, but to keep things simple, we'll look at what are the different tests we can expect in this in this case. So with front end, if we go to a slide, we have three things, right? We have HTML DOM and JavaScript. So we'll look at the code. This might be a bit overwhelming, but then we'll just focus on we'll try to focus on the main, the test rather than getting into details of application. So this is a view application. So for me, what the unit tests for, we'll start identifying what are the different unit tests for our front end, like for the HTML and JavaScript. So if I go to my front end, these are the various components. I have a header, I have two text box, then I have a button, and then I have some results which are displayed. So for this, the only thing which the front end does is when I click submit, it captures the input and sends a request to backend, right? And once the backend responds, it displays the results. So it's a simple application. And to look at the test, what are the different tests we can have? So let's look at the simple. So, so these are some kind of test. Like for example, I see if the auction box, which is this component, is displayed or not. Or for example, or maybe to give a more better example, I'm interested whether all my components are, let me zoom in a bit. Okay, I think now it should be more visible. So for me, I'm more interested into more interested to see like what are my what are my different fields and how they are displayed. For example, if I have to see whether my this text box is displayed, this the sample text box and my button with, if they are displayed. So I'll have a UI which can do the same thing for me. So I can see if my input box is displayed, or maybe if I go further down, if my sample box is displayed. Then there are a few other properties like if the number of rows which are displayed is 11. So for example, if I have configured my application to just show 11 rows, then I have another test for it. Or maybe this has input, this is not a normal input box, so I can't enter anything. So the input is disabled. So I might have a test for that. So instead of my UI test doing it, I'll have my unit test to do it. So for example, yeah, my sample box is disabled, right? So that I'm not able to input anything. Or further up. So, and then we might have to validate if my button is getting displayed, right? So something like that, which can be done by our unit test itself. Say for example, my button, where's my button test? Yes. So this is my button test. It checks if I click on button whether the send event is whether the send method is getting called. So which is responsible to send API call. Any questions so far? Cool. Let me know if you guys have any questions so far. I'll take that as no. So mainly here we are validating our HTML DOM and the JavaScript interaction. So the click event, as you have seen here, a simple example was on click of the submit button. We are seeing if this send method is getting called. So the send method is located in another file. For example, yeah, method is actually doing a post call over here. So we are just where send method is getting called, which is responsible to talk to a backend service. So that's how you can have we can have this test where your end-to-end test with uh, your uh, by validating the buttons or anything. It is the responsibility for the unit test or the DOM. So for your DOM, your unit test should take care of them. And then if you offload this, if you see how much time it takes to run that same test. So for example, I have like 15 test cases, which do various things. If I have to run the same thing, let's see how much time it takes. So it merely takes 5 seconds. So imagine if we have to do the same thing using a UI, right? And if you look at the coverage, it's fairly good. So at least components, all my complete UI has been validated. So even with the home page, I hook in various components. So this being a view application, it is built on a component design where you define various components and then you include that in your HTML file or which is your home page. So this is my home page. Sorry, file. Pages. In pages, we have index.view. This is my home page. So it uh, this, and then the other is in default.view. So if you'll see, we have our title over here. So this is our title, and then we give it we set its value to auction house. So if we have to see a similar test, I have a similar one-to-one mapping. So the default dot layout just verifies if my title is displayed properly. So I just, it's something like where you try to find an element. This is a boiler code, just ignore it. What it does, it actually takes your component and gives you a view object. You consider it like HTML DOM, right? And then over that DOM, you can actually do various. You can use your CSS locators, like you can do hash ID, and then you can check the text if it is optional. So this is much more easier to do because now you have complete control of DOM. And if you want to mock, you can mock your services, like mock your so like here we have tried mocking few boiler code. We need not go in details, but then the main essence of it is it's exactly like Selenium. You have a DOM or you have a component, view component, and then you query it and then do some actions. Like if you want to trigger click, you trigger click and see if a method is called. I can even go ahead and see what are the parameters which have been passed. So I can also see what it's called with. For example, if I have to do, say, if it is called with, so there's another method called with, and maybe if I just pass it empty for now, and if I try to run the test, it will exactly show what it is trying to pass. So what we have done is we have set a test as a mock input in our input box, and here we see there's a failing test, but this is what it is sending. If I have to change, say maybe test 1, 2, 3, if this is the value which is set, then we are sending that value to the backend. So if I rerun the test, so you'll see it is again updating the value which I'm sending. So you can have various various tests like this. So for every line of code which I've written, we make sure we'll have a covering test to it. So this is how you start growing your unit test. And now your end-to-end test can be very simple. It can be just one, because this is one use case. I can have just one end-to-end test. But we'll come to that later. Let's go back to the slide. What about CSS? So I think I haven't got a working example. Maybe in future I'll add something. So we can have a visualization tests like Phantom CSS, or there are frameworks like Phantom CSS, or recently I came across another third party, another commercial tool. I just forgot the name. So that tool actually helps you to screenshot and takes a screenshot and then actually does a UI validation, or it does image to image validation, so that you're sure that the way your front end or the way your application is displayed, it's been tested. So CSS also you can have visual test. It's called visual testing. If you want to do more research on it, you can just type in visual testing and you'll get the links, or you'll get the right tools to do it. Further, we can move to backend. I'll show you quickly what the backend looks like. So this is a Spring Boot application which I built, and this is the API. So this might be overwhelming, but then we won't go in much details. For example, this is my controller. So this is my starting point. So this is my slash process. If you look at our application, right? If I try to debug it, if I go to the network tab, and if I try to click submit, what it does is it sends a post request to my backend, which is at 8080, and the endpoint is slash process, and it is sending this payload, right? So it is sending this payload, and the response I get is obviously the result of the auction. But then if you have to look at the backend, this is the, I'll zoom in a bit. Hope this is visible. So if I look at the backend, this is the method. This is the endpoint, which we are calling, and this is the method. So what it does, it simply does some encoding, does some decoding. Sorry, there's some decoding, and then it calls parse records. And once the records are parsed, it is processing it. So if we look at the test, what to expect, we can actually have one-to-one mapping. For example, for my controllers, right? If I look at my test, I'll have one-to-one mapping. So my controller will have a controller test. My domain objects are again will have unit test. These are all unit tests. And then I have one integration test, which actually invokes the endpoint. It actually uses a mock MVC to invoke the endpoint and then send it an input and then validate the result. So I have this integration test, and then I have again unit test for my utils. So if I have to see, there is always a one-to-one mapping between everything. So all my so I had used TDD to evolve this. Even for front end, I use TDD so that I have 100% test coverage. So let's look at how the test result look like. I'll try to run the test. So there are 40 test cases which I ran recently. So let's see how much time it takes. So whole my business logic I'm validating in 11 seconds, and this includes one integration test as well. So if you want to just scroll up, here it is actually bringing up this Spring Boot application, and then it is running the test, integration test. So it's actually bringing the application up. It is giving it at a random port at runtime. So here the port number is 0, and then it is executing the test and validating the response. So if you'll see, the overall time it took to execute tests is 11 seconds per 5 seconds, which is 16 seconds for the whole application, right? And that includes everything. That includes all my methods, all my, unfortunately, I didn't print the test coverage over here. Maybe next time I'll do that. But then if you look at it, it has almost 100% cover. Even I have, it is bit, over engineering to even have, yeah, even have tests for your setters and getters. But I've even done that just to have more confidence, which is not recommended. But for all business logic, for example, parsing the input, right? I'm actually making sure I I have a test covering for that. Or maybe, for example, let me show you parse input file. So this is the file which is passing the inputs. So it is again in turn calling other domain object like bid seller, but then I make sure I test only that from business point of view. Uh, like if I give various sections like bid, if I give a invalid input, for example, uh, if I just say maybe if I don't pass the timestamp or something, my test should fail. So if there is a TV cell or if there is a bid which is coming, we're just making sure it's being validated and it's parsing the objects well. So and to go further inside, let's look at the integration test. So this is something like end-to-end test for maybe this application, but this is kind of a service test. So for example, in a whole application, we have just one service test, and rest all responsibility has been laid to or to the lower set of pyramid. I haven't done any error handling, so that's why you just see one service test. But then if we have more detailed error handling, we might add more tests. So as I haven't done it, we don't have any. Any questions? Okay, so there's one question which is, do we write CSS as well for unit level? I think CSS at some extent we can still write if you want to validate maybe colors, or maybe if you're maybe disabling the input box, or maybe if you're if you're trying to change some attributes, it's easier to validate. But then if you have to really verify if a specific color, or if the position of if the position of your element, for example, in our case, if the position of our element which is there, if the styling is going to be good, then we can't test it unitly. So we have to use like the visual testing for it. But few aspects definitely we can validate. Like we've already validated whether this box is disabled, which does make sense, and it's easier to test, and we don't have to really do any interaction. So we can obviously rely on the APIs of DOM, and we can obviously cover that in unit test. But then if you have to validate the cosmetic aspects of it, I think visual testing is the right tool to go for. So once we have looked at our various tests, uh, let's move to the second thumb rule. What are the different integration points? So once we have completed our, even we had a controller test, for example, sorry, I missed that point. So for example, for the controller, we are just verifying once we call this, right, whether the controller is being called in right order or not, whether the functions are called in right order or not once our function is called. So for example, partially it's getting covered over here if the endpoint which is slash process, if it is matching to the right method. For example, this controller over here. So this is a controller, right, which is process. So the mapping between process and this has been covered in integration. But then what about the controller? Whether it is calling the right, right methods of my underlying service, or whether it is calling the right, uh, what do we call? Whether it is calling the right methods of business logic. For example, what we are trying to verify here is whether the controller is calling right methods of business logic. So that's what we are trying to test over here at unit level. So if you'll see over here, what we are trying to do is we are just verifying if a specific method is getting called in right order. So if get parameters is been called in right order. So these are the two tests we are verifying. So this is again a unit test. It's not any kind of other kind of test. So that's what a controller test will do. All your endpoints, if they are calling your right logic, if you just validate that whether they are called in where they are calling your right business logic and in right sequence. And then again for utils and library, you have unit tests. So if you do proper TDD, you can write covering tests. So for example, if I go back to the map, right? So this setters application result. So maybe this is get a setter, but then we can go to bid. So like validation, what is the right bid or what is a bid if the formatting of bid is not right. If it is if I say BI double D, it should not work, right? So in this case, we'll have test covering over here, which will verify various things like if my bid is right, uh, if I'm giving a bid with a wrong input, like if I'm giving it a seller kind of thing to a bid option, it should fail. It should tell me it's not a bid. So more like a validation of my more business validation if it is a right kind of bid, right? If for similar same thing is for seller sale. So if someone is trying to sell and to put up a sale, then we are validating. We are making sure we are validating that. So every line of code has been covered by a unit test over here. So let's move to the next thumb rule. What are the different, so now once we have looked at the unit test, what are the different type of tests? What are the different integration points which we have to consider? For example, this was a simple front-end, back-end application, but then what if we have kind of a microservice architecture, or if we are talking to third-party services like maybe Google API, or maybe we are consuming a S3 bucket. We are trying to write something to S3 bucket, or if we are trying to invoke a Lambda function, what are the different tests we can expect? So we have to try identifying the different integration points in our application. So once we have covered the unit test, we now move to various integration points. So we have already looked at one integration, which is the service test, right? So integration test, which we looked at, is you verify by calling the actual endpoint and see if it works. So that can be very lightweight. As you have seen, we had more focus on more and more tests at unit level, but just one integration test. They can be more based on the domain, right? So here I'm just having one endpoint, just doing one thing. But if you have multiple endpoints, which are doing various things, for example, instead of bid, I have maybe just trying to list the users, right? For users, you might have another integration test which you can hit and see what are the different users, whether you can fetch all the list of users. So there you might have only one test, but then the permutation combination of whether a user is valid or invalid, that can be done by the unit test. So in case of maybe third-party integration like S3 bucket, right? You can use mocks, various mocks. You don't have to actually invoke the real service, S3 service. You might do that as a just one end-to-end test or integration test, but then for your real integration testing, you might use mocks which are published by AWS, third-party mocking services, mocking libraries, which you can use. But then these are the initial points we need to start thinking. So as you see, we are moving up the pyramid. So initially we looked at the lower part of pyramid, or the lowest base of pyramid, where we talked about all our unit tests. Now this is a bit moving up in the architecture. These are all the integration points for which you can start identifying different tests. I don't have a working example for now, but then maybe in future, as and when uh, I'll try to use my same application, which is this, and I'll try to add more tests. I'll share the GitHub link. The code is there on GitHub, and as and when you can see different updates, I'll start I'll start adding more examples to it. But this is just to give you know just brainstorm and just put everything in front of you to so that we can think. And for end-to-end tests, like this I think there are various framework you have nowadays. Like you have Protector, you have Cypress, you have Selenium. So I have one example of end-to-end test which I can quickly show you. So I've used a tool called as Cypress to write end-to-end tests. So which will navigate to my application, which is it will type in the input and then it will click on submit. So that's what I have just one end-to-end test. So if we look at the top of pyramid, we have just one test. So if you look at the feedback, it's 9 seconds. So imagine if we have maybe 40 test cases, 14 to 9 seconds is our execution time. And it would again depend on how complex is the business logic, right? So, so for so this is how like my total build time in my whole application can be, for example, 11 plus 5 seconds, which is somewhere around 16 plus 9. So if I have to hook this into my integration server, my overall feedback, and this is 9, right? So it's around 24 seconds. So my whole application I'm able to test in 24 seconds. Whereas if I had to add a lot of end-to-end tests, it might be maybe minutes for this small application. And imagine if it's a big system, it might just take hours and hours. And that's what actually we had tried balancing our pyramid, right? So we have just one end-to-end test. We have a lot of unit and integration tests over here, close 40, and there's like 14 test cases for my front end. So like we have in all 40 plus 14 is around 54 and 55. We have 55 test cases running in exactly 25 seconds overall. So if we try to balance the test pyramid, this is the benefit we get. Oh, sorry, I'll move to. So I think in interest of time, we have only 3 minutes left. Do we have any questions? Because the next section I might just run around quickly because I think in interest of time, uh, I'll skip that because most of that I have already covered, but I will quickly go through it. But any questions so far? If you have any questions, you can put them in Zoom chat. Cool. I'll take that as no. So when we integrate them with the next thing I wanted to bring was when in the SDLC life cycle, the various tests will come in place. So if we look at the current slide, we have unit and static code analyzers and visual testing just after we push our code in a repo. They can happen at build time itself. Once the build is done, we deploy it to dev, or we might also deploy any third-party dependent service or like Google API. And then we might run our integrated test, and finally we might run our end-to-end test. And further, if our application is more complex, we might run our contract test. We'll come to contract test later, or maybe in interest of time, I'll skip contract test. So I had a slide for pack test, but then I'll skip that for now. So to conclude, I think what I have is just to achieve balanced test pyramid. I think we just need a good upfront design and a small shift in culture to start doing, having a balanced test pyramid. And that's all, guys. That's all I wanted to demo. Like this is what I was planning to demo, just to show what are the benefits of balancing the test pyramid, or how we can balance the test pyramid. Over to you, Billy.
Brilliant. Well, thanks very much for that talk, Abhijeet. Really interesting. If anyone does have any further questions that they can think of, are you happy for them to reach out to you on LinkedIn or any other form of contact?
Yep. Yes,
Good stuff.
definitely. One small last call out. I'd actually referred to one of the blogs of Martin Follower. It's quite useful. And then also, I think you can also look at fact and contract test. Maybe next time if I have to present this talk again, I might just refine my existing example and have more insights to have more pact or contractors and more examples of it. But that's all, guys. Thank you so much for your time.
Well, thank you, Abhijeet, for your time and giving today's talk. Sorry, we've just had a request from Leslie. If you could share the links and maybe your slides, Abhijeet, on the meetup page, that'd be brilliant.
Definitely.
We have recorded the session, and it will be on Expertise Recruitment's YouTube page over the coming weeks. So huge thank you again, Abhijeet. Everyone enjoy your evenings, get out in the sun, and thanks for coming along to Quality Advocates.
Yep. Thank you, guys. See you. Bye.
Thanks, guys. Bye-bye.